main thing now that we want to talk about is the parameters. Parameters go into parentheses, okay? So whether it's built-in functions or it's user-defined functions, you have to have either a parameter in it or no parameters. So you can have 0 parameters, you could have 1 parameter, you could have multiple parameters even, depending on the case in point, depending on what you're trying to do. So for instance, when you're saying get ready for school, that means you have to put a parameter in there. If you have 5 children and you say, Mary, get ready for school, Mary will go ahead and get ready for school. Everybody else will not. If you say Mary and John, get ready for school, both of them will get ready for school. If you have 2 children or if you have 2 teams and you say Chelsea, play against Real Madrid, those 2 teams will be playing each other while everybody else is not playing, right? Like
Real Madrid is gonna win.
Exactly, right? So it depends on what you're looking at. Just in this example, right? You have defined a function. You define the function, the name of the function is add. You're giving in 2 parameters, A and B. And now you're returning a value saying that A plus B. Each time you write this function add, and then you put 2 numbers in there, it's always going to give you the sum of those 2 numbers. So this is how you would call the function. You type in add 2 and 3, that's going to return 5. Does that make sense? So in that case, you've created the function by defining it. You gave 2 parameters. Parameters go into parentheses. Parameters are what you use when you're defining, when you're creating the function. Arguments are what you use when you're calling the function. So let's take a step back though and go back to our variables. The variables usually have a scope, okay? So what we have in here, the question that Fabian asked earlier, what happens to this user input? This user input is only alive within the scope of this function. After this function is done, the user input is wiped out. It is a local variable. The same way this integer user input, it's only valid within this function. That makes it a local variable. If I go out here and I try to print it, the print user input, it's not going to work. And you can see it's already having a yellow squiggly in there, yellow underline. If I put my mouse over it, it tells me user input is not defined. User input is not defined because it's only alive in here. So that will give me an error message when I run my code. So let's execute that. Enter a value 77. Oops, wrong place. Let's go back there. 77. And it gives me an error. The name user input is not defined. That's because it's a local variable. It's only alive in the function. Does that make sense? Awesome. So we've talked about the local variables. What about the arguments? Let's try this. The argument is the data that you pass into the function when you call it. Meanwhile, the parameter is a variable that receives that argument. When you pass 2, 2 becomes A. When you pass 3, 3 becomes B. Okay? So those are the 2 things that most people usually get confused in programming. They said, okay, you need to change your parameters. If you need to change your parameters, that means you need to change the definition of your function. If it says your arguments are incorrect, that means you need to change the arguments that you enter. Okay? So parameter variables are also only within this scope. You cannot take A and use it outside in your code. It's going to give you an error. But in some cases, you have global variables and global constants. Global variables and global constants would be something that you define outside the function. Most of the time, they write them in capital letters. So let's say constant, for instance, let's say name can be set to none. That's always going to be the name no matter what. So that's a constant, as you can see when you put your mouse on it. That's a constant. It's always good anywhere within the definition of the function. You can use it. Outside, you can use it. If I go ahead and type in name in here, oops, let me select all of that. It's going to print out John, regardless of anywhere I use it. So that will be a constant variable. We'll look at some examples when we get back after lunch or after our break. Sounds good? So this example also uses 2 arguments, okay? We're using multiple arguments. In some cases, you might use 1 or more arguments. In other cases, you might use keyword arguments. So keyword arguments are very, very important. So you can decide the name of your argument and then give it a value. So let me go and try out an example of a keyword argument. Does everybody understand what I mean by a keyword argument? Okay, do we have any questions on that?
I guess when we see the example, it will make more sense.
Okay.
Because it sounds like it's a global variable in a sense.
Okay.
But
All right, so let me go ahead and see if I can give an example of a keyword argument here. So for instance, let me go ahead and open a new file here. I'll call it kwargs. UI. So keyword argument is commonly known as kwargs. Let me kwargs equal to keyword. So for instance, we did write a program that was able to calculate salary, right? So what were some of the things that we needed to calculate the salary? So if we want to write a function to calculate the salary, some of the things we'll need is the hours that you worked. Then we need to also get the pay rate, right? So let's go ahead and write a function that does that. Okay, so let's say define salary The salary should be able to take two things: hours worked. Oh, I cannot type. And pay rate. Those are the two arguments that are going to be entered in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So if that's the case, then we know that our salary should be equal to hours times pay, right? And then all we need to do is, if those two are the inputs, our output should be the salary, right? Something as easy as that. But we have to accommodate for overtime and so on and so forth. We can set that up in here if we like, and so on and so forth. But a keyword argument will be in the case where we want to say the user has to have a particular pay. So if we go ahead and say pay equal to 20, that means.
Prof, let me just split with you.
Yes.
I'm really trying so hard to understand this thing.
Yes.
Can you use a different word for the function name and the variable salary so that?
Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good, very good. So
you're calling out for his own stuff. Yes.
That's very good, because you don't want to use the name of a function and the name of a salary. That's why I said it's always good to use a verb in your function. So in here, the better way to have this would be calculate salary.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're doing. Does that help out, Fabian?
Zen of Python.
Exactly. Zen of Python. Yes. You definitely want this to be a verb. Calculate salary would need the hours and the pay. In this example, the pay now becomes a keyword argument, which means the pay is also optional. If I want this, if I call this and I don't enter a pay, then what I'm doing is I'm saying the pay is 20. Does that help out?
So that's like a default. Right?
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
It's a default.
Boom. It just makes sense now. Okay.
Right. So if I go ahead now,
okay.
After creating that function, if I want to use it, I have to call it. To call it, let's say calculate salary. I can go ahead and enter. Now it's asking me hours can take in any value. The pay has a default of 20. And then your output can be anything. So if I put in hours as 40 hours, what do you think the result would be?
40 times 20.
800.
We might have an error in here. Let's execute that and see. What am I missing here? Did I save it? Let's go ahead and clear this. All right. So let's execute that. Doesn't look like it works out for us. Now let's go ahead and try 40 and 10. Execute that. It still did not return anything. That's because that's why. Because I'm not printing it out. So let's go ahead and assign this to a variable and then print out that variable. Let's say your salary should be equal to that. And then we want to print your salary. Yeah, I keep forgetting that I'm not in Anaconda notebooks anymore, Jupyter notebooks. So let's execute that. Now it tells me 400 is my salary because I entered my pay as 10. If I went ahead and took that out and executed it, it's 800 because it's using that default value. Okay. So I can go ahead and update this and say regular hours and also have overtime hours. Okay. So now I'm getting 3 inputs: putting your regular hours, putting your overtime hours, and putting your pay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So your salary now would be equal to your regular hours times your pay. And let's go ahead and add your overtime, right?
Yeah.
You need to also have your overtime hours times your pay multiplied by 1.5. So if your overtime hours is 0, then that's fine. We can also set our default overtime hours to be equal to 0.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now if you want to execute this, it's going to say 40 is your regular hours, overtime hours is 0, pay is 20, and we should still be fine. But what if I had overtime hours? If I have to enter overtime hours as 10, is that going to work?
Overtime hours is 10. I think it's going to work because of the position of that argument as well.
Okay, but we have 3 arguments and it's taking 2. So it might give us an error if we execute that.
Yeah, okay.
It gives us 110. So it definitely works because of the position.
Yeah.
So a few things to note. You want to make sure that all your optional parameters are at the end of the code. Otherwise, if you have them in the beginning of the code, you might have an error. So let me get this out of there.
But it also took the pay, the keywords in the pay, and used it, right? Since even
exactly,
though
it took the pay and used it. Okay. So if I write my code, does that clarify for you, Fabian? So it took
yes, it does.
Yeah, so definitely it knows that the first, second, the last one is omitted, so it's going to take 20. That's why it took 20, and it took overtime for 10. out of those 10 hours of overtime, you end up having, I don't know, $300. $300 added to the 800 that you did originally gives you 1100. Okay. But the one thing that I wanted to point out is make sure that when you're typing in your arguments, your optional parameters always come at the end. You cannot start with an optional parameter and then you go ahead and input another parameter before going back to an optional parameter. Okay. So as you can see, that tells me there's an error there. Sometimes when you have these errors, if you're using an IDE like Visual Studio Code, it's good to click on that view program and it tells you what the problem is. So this blue view problem option right here, once I click it, it tells me your kwargs has one problem. Non-default argument follows default argument. So that's a default argument. It should be at the end. So let me go ahead and undo what I did. That's what's supposed to be the right order. So as keyword arguments, you can go ahead and input it in any order though. I can go ahead and say pay equal to 50. And then I can go ahead and say regular hours equals to 40. And I can go ahead and say overtime hours equal to 20. That will work just fine because I'm using my keywords to specify each one of those inputs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So keyword arguments are very useful and very powerful. You can set it up whichever order you want, right? So again, if I don't want to hard code it, I can go ahead and have maybe input, enter pay, and so on and so forth. So in here, I probably want to say pay equal to that. Does that make sense? So we're using our input built-in function to get the user to input something, but this is probably going to error out because the output would be a string. So we need to go ahead and change it to an integer. So all of this now, which we're doing here, is the stuff that we did in here. So if we had this function ready, we could have not have to type in that all along again. We'll just go ahead and define this function, which gets a user input and changes it to an integer output. Let me copy that over to the other file. So we have a new function in there. And then it returns that. And if that's the case, I can go ahead and rather than entering this, I could say the pay is equal to, what's the name of that? Enter input.
Enter input.
And that should be just good. Now I can even make my enter input to also take a particular argument. Maybe I can make it to take one parameter. That parameter would be name of input, right? If I decide to say name of input, instead of say enter value, I can go ahead and say enter. Then I'll put in the name of the input. The name of input would be whatever string I want to use. So let me copy that. Now, if I want to use it in here, it's probably going to give me an error message if I don't have an input. So it says enter input should have name of input. In here, all I have to do now is, so enter pay. And it's going to say enter pay when I execute it. So it's going to say enter pay. I'll enter it, and that's good. Which means I can also use it for regular hours, right? And then I can go ahead and say enter regular hours. Let me copy this. And I can use it as well for overtime. Say enter overtime. Now, if I execute that, you can see that instead of writing so many lines of code, let's go ahead and delete all these comments in here to make my code simpler. So just in 10 lines of code, I was able to do all of those. If I execute it, all of this is just defining my function. This is just defining my function. I've defined this function, I defined that function. Now I'm getting a variable to hold my salary. Okay, oopsie. Once I have a variable to hold my salary, I print it. So that variable is taking one function and you're having a nested function within it. So if I execute this, let me clear this out first. I think there was something I needed to fix here. Enter this. Yeah, let me put this on a new line because I don't like that. Yeah, so that will go on the new line. Execute that. Now it says enter pay. It's gone to a new line. My pay is $50. Regular hours 40. Overtime 10 hours. And it gives you a total. Looks good.
Is that what you make an hour with Python?
That
This is something else.
No, because again, this is for 40 hours. That's for a week, right? 1 week you put in 40 hours and 10 hours overtime, and if you get paid $10, that's how much you get. So now we've been able to use functions to make our code easier and more reusable. Anywhere down the road we want to use that enter input, we can use it and it works just fine because we're able to get a user input and it outputs an integer for us. Now it's easy for you to use that try catch or try except. Okay,
Yeah.
Because if you want to use try except, you're just going to use try except on your function.
That's why I got stuck, because I'm stuck this morning.
Exactly. That's why I said once we get to functions, it's going to make your life a lot easier to be able to do those.
Prof, if you expand number 4, line 4 there are two functions that we are using. Now, with the concept of the global variable, you told us in the previous classes that you can introduce a variable at any point in your code, right? For example, name equal John, you can put it on line 2. You can still go down to line, maybe line 13, is it?
Yes.
Put name equal John, and it should work. Something like that, if I remember well.
Yes, so this name equal to John that we're using on line, let me make it better. On line 3 is a global variable, right? Yes. Which means you can use it inside this function. You can use it inside this function. You can also use it outside the function. But within this function, we have name of input. Name of input is a parameter. It's a local parameter. You can only use this bucket within this function. That's why we could use it here. We cannot use it in another function. We cannot use it outside. It's just a placeholder. The parameter is just a placeholder so that when you have your argument passed into that function, the argument gets passed to the parameter to execute. So in here on line 22, we called a function. That function that we had defined, enter input. In here, we passed an argument called pay. The argument called pay gets passed into name of input. Name of input now is going to substitute pay wherever you have it in your code. So it's going to say enter pay. We use that same function though to get regular hours. We use that same function again to get overtime. Does that help?
Yes.
But with name, you can use name anywhere. You know, we can go ahead and print out our name in here. So we can go ahead and say name has entered an input every time we enter it. And when we go into the calculate, we can also use it. Before we return it, we can say name has a particular salary, right? So let's print name. We can go ahead and say name has a salary of salary. Yes, question, Aaron.
Is it safe to say that if there is a local variable and a global variable with the same name, the code is going to look at the local first before it goes to the global?
That's going to be challenging, though. I think you might run into an error if you have that. But most of the time, you need to remember also that naming convention matters. This name is in caps, so we know it's a global variable. If we have another variable in here that's lowercase name, that's totally something different, right? So name in here could be DK. That should work just fine. But if we try to use capital NAME, we'll definitely have an error. Or pretty much, it's just saying, now we assign this value. The value before was John, changed John, now it's going to be DK.
Okay, because that's what I was, not that I've tried anything, I was just thinking, because there are situations where you can, you might want the local variable to be different from what the global variable is, and you may want to use that local. And then there are situations where if you call a function that does not have that local, you probably want to pull the global. I'm just thinking about you.
Yes, that's totally fine. You can change the name in here to be DK, but understand that this is only going to change within this function.
Exactly.
Out of the function, it's still going to be John.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this case, if we want to print, it's going to say DK has entered an input, DK has entered an input, but here it's going to still be John has a salary of that. Because John is a global variable, it's alive throughout the program. Here, DK is a local variable, it's alive only within this input. So very good question. All right.
My comment would be that we just apply simple is better than complicated.
Yes, simple is better than complicated. You definitely want to not complicate things, all right?
Use a different variable with name.
Yes, use a different one and save yourself the headache. We've gone over our time so far before our first break. It's about 8 minutes after the hour, but I think we're doing good on time because the next thing we had to do was, if simple is better than complex, complex is better than complicated. So I'll give you 5 minutes break, very short break to catch up, catch your breath, test a few things, walk away from your computer or your phone, and then when we come back, we're going to look at return. I know we've talked about return, but we'll still look at return a little bit, and then we'll look at a few practice questions. Sounds good?
Yeah, it amazes me that I can write 5 lines of code.
I'm glad that we're all
what this guy is doing, I tell you, anytime like this keyword argument, I used to call it kwargs, right? Every time I look at the code and I saw that thing, I'm like, what is it? But thank you so much. I can appreciate you enough. I can even stand the side of Python code now, like to even look at it and say,
this is the fundamentals. Once you're comfortable with the fundamentals, nothing is going to scare you. Nothing at all is going to scare you. All right, so we've gone over